pleasure in opening the council briefing of the 13th of August 2024 at 6 p.m, and I welcome all those in attendance. The City of Vincent would like to acknowledge that they're traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that as the City of Vincent we have a role in terms of working towards reconciliation and justice with First Nations people. I have received one apology from Councillor Ashley Wallace, and I also note that we've been joined by Councillor Sophie Greer online. Hello, Councillor Greer. And I don't have any approved leave of absence. We'll move to public question time. Can I just see with an indication of hands, please, whether there are any other members of the public present who wish to speak? Okay, fantastic. If you haven't been to a briefing at the City of Vincent before, though I can see some familiar faces, then we ask that when you come forward that you state your name and also the suburb in which you reside, and importantly the agenda item that you wish to speak to tonight. I do remind members of the public that briefing sessions are only for items which are on the agenda. If you have broader matters that you wish to bring to the council's attention, then you're welcome to come next week for the ordinary council meeting where broader matters can be brought up. You are actually limited to 3 minutes, which you will be able to see on the screen. If you're speaking on the same item as someone else, it would be really greatly appreciated if you don't repeat the points that have already been made, and please bring new issues up. Although you're welcome to say, I agree with the person that spoke, but more so if you want to. So the meeting is being live streamed, and if you don't want to appear on the live stream, please let us know at the beginning of your remarks. Who would like to come forward, please, first? Hello. We'll just get the microphone to work, not least of which, even if people here can hear you, and not everyone can, we want to make sure that it's captured for the live stream, okay? Marvellous Wendy is working on this now. Hello.
Okay. My name's Sally Baker, North Perth, and agenda item 5.2. I reside in a top floor apartment at 1 Albert Street, North Perth, directly next to the site of the proposed 24-hour petrol station. Selling the family home in Inglewood in 2018, I decided I wanted to swap constant trips to Bunnings and the pool shop for stepping out my door to the buzz of inner city. I moved to Fitzroy in Melbourne, and there I found my love for apartment living, diversity, and rarely taking the car out of its basement car parking bay. Returning to Perth in 2022, I wanted the same. As you all know, health and environment in which we live are closely linked. The 2011 Australian Institute of Health and Welfare study, Health and the Environment, found that people living in more walkable neighbourhoods, characterised by safe pedestrian crossings, well-designed footpaths, high residential density and pedestrian-orientated shopping, were less likely to be obese than people living in less walkable areas, and they were also happier. The same evidence was found in a 2016 Oxford University study advising councils to plan neighbourhoods to promote physical activity, social interaction, and shield them from negatives such as pollution and feeling unsafe. City of Vincent's objectives are certainly in line with the walkability principles and safe communities. It's a great place to live. Now, this second proposed petrol station development application directly challenges any continuation of these principles. Angrove Street is narrow. Woodville Street is hard to drive through now. It's impossible to envision the impact on our streets with no traffic impact statement included and a previously flawed statement undertaken during COVID lockdown and school holidays. No matter what mitigations and faux assurances that can be read in the application, this 24-hour, 7-day-a-week petrol station is still a petrol station with an inordinate amount of associated health and safety risks. If approved, living in such close proximity is not in my own health and happiness life plan. Utilise those study guidelines to help find a safer location. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Well timed too. Would next speaker please?
John Williamson, resident of Burswood, here to speak in relation to item 5.3. Thank you, Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'd firstly like to express our support for the officer's recommendation. The local development plan presented tonight is the culmination of several years of collaborative engagement between the city and the proponent to deliver a balanced and considered framework for this landmark site. We wish to thank the officers and the design review panel for their consideration and feedback and confirm that we're also supportive of the recommendation and conditions of officers. Through the process, and particularly following consultation, we undertook a range of modifications to affect that balance, including considerations of the feedback that was received by community and government stakeholders. The result of that is, despite the fact that the Charles Hotel site is a landmark site totalling over 1.3 hectares, there's been a concerted effort to balance density across the site rather than a blanket approach. This has included, both from the outset and following consultation, much reduced building heights adjacent to lower density residential properties to create a sympathetic transition, increasing street setbacks to align with established streetscapes, setting back of upper floors along Charles Street and Carrington Street, recess the built form in the street from the street boundary, provision of dedicated accessible central landscape plaza that will assist in both the activation to deliver vibrant public open space as a benefit to the community. The local development plan is deliberately configured in this manner to ensure the site reflects its landmark status whilst ensuring there is an appropriate balance and protection for adjoining neighbouring areas. It has not been an attempt to maximise out development of the site, as the council would be aware has occurred with other parcels in the city's jurisdiction. Before I pass over to Jimmy, I'd like to conclude by noting we have used our best endeavours to ensure the plan respects the strategic vision of the site under the LPS, coordinated with mixed-use development within proximity to the CBD. Careful design has been implemented to ensure a sympathetic transition to lower density residential properties whilst promoting streetscape activation and vibrant public open space through the landscape plaza commitment. We respectfully request the council's support of the proposal. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good evening, everyone, elected members and staff. Jimmy Thompson, Raglan Road, North Perth. Can I have my slides that I sent through up on screen, please? So this is a project which I've had a long association with. We first started to talk to council and the community in 2017, and yeah, thanks. And these first couple of slides are actually slides from a presentation which I did here in 2018 to elected members. And I bring them up because the reasons for this project are still relevant and make good sense. So if we can change slide, please. So when you look at Charles Street in the context of the City of Vincent, you can see that it clearly bisects our neighbourhoods. And it's a major gateway, both north and south. Slide, please. And yet, when you look at where our activity centres are, none of them actually meet Charles Street. So the thing about this site, and generally accumulated sites across the metro area, is when you have land under one ownership, you've got a great opportunity in places like this to actually create new little nodes. Can I change the slide, please? So this is one of those rare opportunities where you have land ownership agglomerated under one owner, where you can actually create a local development plan. And so what you guys are looking at tonight is not a series of DAs. It doesn't have that level of detail, but it provides a broad framework which is controlled and, essentially to be supported by you guys before it can get written into code. And it should be recognised that there's been a long collaboration between the landowner and planning staff and the community on this site. So, theoretically, they could have gone straight to SGAU with a proposal and gone to get a much larger scheme approved. But I think there's been a lot of goodwill in terms of how the proponents and the ownership group have actually approached in good faith with the city how you could actually control development on this site. Next slide, please. So the idea is that you could create a new boutique little neighbourhood centre here. So if you think about Ellesmere, which these sites cross over, that's 100 metres. Angove Street between the Rosie and Stomp Cafe is 150 metres. So that gives you an idea of some of the context of this little neighbourhood centre that we can create. And what we're talking about is heights ranging from 2 stories to 8 stories. So we've actually got room across this site to taper down along the edges. Okay, next slide, please. During this process, there's been a lot of negotiations with city planning staff, and this image indicates a view looking north across Carrington Street. And importantly, it shows the transition between our R60 neighbour to the left. So as of right, they could go to 3 stories. We've essentially got a 4-storey limit, but with that 4th storey set back 7 metres from the street. So there's been careful consideration about how you transition from lower zone neighbours into this little neighbourhood centre. Next slide, please. And then on Charles Street, where you get the tallest elements, you can see again that transition of height and setback, so that you've got essentially a road widening, then a 2 metre setback for the first 5 stories, and then 7 metres to the NAB floors above. And next slide, please.
Can I ask, so you've actually run out of time.
All good.
Can I suggest you of course are able to come and present at the ordinary council meeting next week as well?
Sure.
So thank you very much. Okay. Can I have the next speaker, please?
Hi, my name's Trisha Judici, and our family have lived in Selden Street for the past 46 years, and probably ideally following on from the previous speech, I'm not opposed to the development of the hotel site.
Sorry, so I just want to be clear.
5.3.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm not opposed to the development of the hotel site. I have a number of concerns, which I have previously raised with council. Because of the sheer size of this building and the fact that there are only 2 access points, both on Eaton Street, I'm very concerned about the impact on traffic. How will it be addressed, given we already have existing issues with many reported incidents on the corner of Eaton and Ellesmere, and there'll be large developments on both those corners. Also, many near misses there, and also on the corner of Selden and Ellesmere, where vehicles still speed despite the 40 kilometre signs, as these roads are used as a bypass for people coming from Green to try maybe go to Scarborough Beach Road or into Charles or onto London Street. So how is the parking going to be managed for all these competing uses? For example, a tavern, small bar, shop, and possibly a childcare centre. And where will visitors and others park when accessing the sites? Will all the surrounds of the park be clogged with parked cars? And how can we maintain the quiet enjoyment and relative safety when walking to and from the park? And also Lillyman's Reserve, which is just around the corner from where I live, and many young families and elderly who use these facilities. And already it's a little bit of an issue sometimes crossing the road. So hopefully those issues can be addressed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I have the next speaker, please?
Hi, everyone. I've got 3 minutes. Is that correct? All right, so my name's Hessom. Me and my family live at 15 Woodville Street, which is the closest residential property to the proposed petrol station development at 41 to 43 Angove. I'm going to start off with a statement and then I've got a question for everyone. The statement is probably a statement of the obvious, which is no one wants these guys here. The community doesn't want them here. Local people don't want them here. The school doesn't want them there. Most local businesses don't want them there. It fails the common sense test on all counts. We all know this, okay? Therefore, leads to my question, which is this. We've been engaged in this process for, I think, a couple of years now, almost. Bit of a dance. We're all sort of dancing, and I understand the need for process. You know, businesses deserve an opportunity to submit development applications. I get that. The question is, in a situation where it fails every single test except the selfish interest of a single business, is there a provision in the planning regulations where you can definitively and permanently prevent or block that company from making applications that are fundamentally of the same nature? Meaning you can spruce up the servo one way, you can change it cosmetically another way, but as long as it's fundamentally a petrol station, which we know is inappropriate for the site for lots of reasons, is there something in the regulations that can allow a permanent prevention of that nature of submission from being submitted again? In other words, can we just permanently piss these guys off? Thank you.
Okay, can we have the next speaker, please?
Good evening, Craig Willis, Woodville Street resident. I live next door to Hessom. I concur with everything that he's just said, and Sue as well. Possible, if you have page 35 of the actual document that I was sent, it has a picture in that document, and I just want to actually draw your attention to that picture. Unfortunately, as part of the community, we're asked to comment on the information that we're given. Now, if you look at that picture, it's a picture of the actual service station site, and there's a red bracket around it, and it says not part of the application. Well, unfortunately, as part of the advertising process, as long as all these other people stood behind there getting signatures about this application, with the picture was actually representing the block that we're not supposed to be speaking about, and I feel that we were absolutely misrepresented. I met with Jay and Alison, and the application was of such a poor quality that when her face was just like astounded at, one, how this got out, and secondly, that the advertised picture is not representative of what we're supposed to be even talking about. Now, we've spent an enormous amount of resources. You know, Hess has been here from a health situation. I'm talking about a process situation. The application is such a poor quality that when we're asked to make comment, that 1 minute we're being asked to talk about 4 blocks of land and an amalgamation of that site back in August of 23. The second document, and it's in the documents that you've got, and there is a typo that again talks about the 4 amalgamated blocks. So here we are with just information that in my view was just not worth commenting on. I want to change tack now and talk about the quality of what's happened, in the process. I want to take my hat off to Jay and his people. I want to represent all the councils that have listened to this process, and I've read a lot of opposals to other applications, and this one is the strongest one I've ever seen. We met with the councillors earlier on. I know that they're probably going to get up and say that they want a continuous use under the previous act. I can 100% guarantee that they currently do not have a licence on that site for handling dangerous goods, and right now there are tanks under that site. Now, in the documentation that we've been given that says that they don't know that they've got tanks under that site, 100% they do. It's documented. So right now we have an applicant who doesn't have a licence to even have that site. There is tanks under that site right now, and there's no licence for it. For them to say that they've got a continuous use application, they currently do not have a licence right now. And again, I want to congratulate Jay and his team for the executive summary, the detail in that executive summary. When you guys go to vote, all I want you to do is to read that, digest it, and make your own mind up. And I thank you, the council. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Next speaker, please. I'd also like to note how good people are being at not repeating previous points, but bringing new information to the meeting. Thank you.
So David Reid from Element Advisory, St George's Terrace, Perth, and I'm speaking on behalf of Kids Galore, who are tenants of 15 Haynes Street, North Perth. I'm speaking on agenda item 5.6 regarding the new lease extension. And so, yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and elected members. So Kids Galore have been part of the City of Vincent since 1995 and started the whole journey with Haynes Street, Kyilla, over a decade ago at the request of the then Mayor, Alana McTiernan. As many of you know, our more recent transition journey with the city has been going for some 6 years. This transition plan started when Kids Galore purchased the old police station in Ellesmere Street in Mount Hawthorn in 2016 with a view to relocating there, but unfortunately that application was refused. In August of 2020, Kids Galore then purchased 6 London Street, just down the road from Kyilla, and in November of the same year secured development approval for a single-level childcare facility, only to find out that Western Power had no power allocated to the property at all, and connection would require cost-prohibitive upgrades. So this, combined with the uncertainty of material supplies during COVID, meant the project was no longer possible. In August 2023, following the announcement of the City of Vincent and Western Power Underground Power Program, which we're incredibly grateful for, Kids Galore again prepared a whole new application for a single-storey childcare facility with rooftop parking, thus freeing up the ground floor area to allow for more play space to increase the number of children able to be cared for on the site. Whilst the full pack was submitted to the City on the 10th of August 2023, it was never officially lodged as there were still uncertainties regarding the timing of when power will be connected to the site. Obviously, Kids Galore can't risk the build cost and then not be able to open the facility. So it's very clear that Kids Galore are doing everything possible they can to relocate from its Kyilla facility, but we just need more time. Kids Galore are still working towards the relocation and are spending considerable funds maintaining the city's old building on the site to stay a part of the local community in the interim. Finally, we'd just like to thank the city's officers for helping us secure the Attorney General's support for the extension and the wonderful job that the city's done for the local community on building half the park to date. The increased revenue the city will receive during this lease period will only further enhance the park's final delivery. We hope to receive your support on the new lease extension. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to speak next?
Good evening. My name is Wayne Bayliss. I live on the corner of Angove and Daphne Street in North Perth. So other than the people that live next to the service station, we are the first house on the right-hand side. Firstly, I'd like to thank the council for being very supportive to our group trying to get this service station stopped. It's been fantastic because we haven't had the support of a local member of parliament because there's a conflict of interest, so there's nobody else that can represent us. But what I find astounding is the amount of money that the City of Vincent must have spent on this. It must be in the hundreds of thousands to do this. All the work that the staff have put in, that's crazy. This is a stupid proposal that you can actually build a petrol station in a cafe strip. If you're going to build it, sell electric power. Why sell gasoline and diesel? And the other part is right next to that petrol station where the block of units is, it's set back from the road with a beautiful parkland. It's gorgeous. I often sit in there with my wife and the neighbours and we have a glass of wine of a summer afternoon. Why can't we extend that parkland further into that building and set anything? Then we can build an apartment block there behind. I'm absolutely astounded, but thank you.
Who would like to speak next, please?
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Nick Hitting Urban Planning, Unit 2, number 19 York Street in Subiaco. Thanks for the opportunity. I act for OTR 208 Proprietary Limited, the owner of the land, for 4143 Angove Street, North Perth, item 5.2. The application before the council is an improvement proposal to an existing building, and our client wishes to improve the condition of their existing building and should be permitted to do so. We note the recommendation for refusal set out in the agenda papers. However, we do not agree with the reasons that are set out and recommended by officers. In its reasons, the city's officers claim that there are no existing use rights in relation to the previously approved service station, and I find that quite extraordinary. In the material I circulated this afternoon, I attached legal advice which deals with this comprehensively. And without a doubt, there are existing use rights afforded to the site. And I hope that the council has a chance to consider that advice in its deliberations between now and next week. In our view, there's nothing preventing the council from dealing with the application before it based on the land use. In relation to other matters raised in the reasons for refusal, they relate primarily to built form and landscaping matters. As these are items that are set out in policy, we believe that the city should not be stringently applying its policy when dealing with an improvement proposal to an existing building. In many circumstances where there's existing buildings, applying a policy that has requirements that cannot be achieved simply because there's an existing building and existing access ways in place, the provisions of the policy should be dealt with on a case-by-case basis and not imposed stringently. In relation to issues such as passive surveillance, which again has been raised as a reason for refusal, the proposal involves new windows, and if there's a requirement for larger windows to be incorporated into the facade of Woodville Street, then the applicant can consider that. In terms of amenity and operational items, with respect, these are issues related for a land use application. The application before you is an application for improvement works, and everything related to operational requirements and talk about 24-hour operations and things like that, they're not in the scope of this application. This application is for improvement works only, and the considerations of those things should happen separately and with respect have been dealt with separately in the previous approvals that apply to this site. I know I don't have much time left, so I just kindly ask that the council consider everything on balance, look at the material, look at the information that we've circulated in respect of the use rights, and we look forward to council's deliberations between now and next week. Thank you.
Do we have a further speaker?
Evening, everybody. My name is Chris Watt. I'm the owner of Stomach Coffee at 39 Angrove Street. I've been there for 7.5 years now, directly opposite the petrol station. There's a lot of submissions I've provided you guys and spoke to you on the last SAT, which are all still very current. But I guess some of the main things I'd like to kind of bring up while you guys have got another week worth of deliberation is I noticed it, as Nick was talking about the continuation of the licence. If Kathy wasn't using it, in the 7 years that I've been there, I've been working 6 days a week there, and I saw a tanker truck never come up and pull up and fill up to her places. If she had their traffic management report, which didn't exist in this one, and I believe that this application is just to get their foot in the door so they can operate a convenience store, because OTR's slogan is literally, we are always open. And they're going to be going down that route. Obviously, the permit and the license use for diesel and petroleum products is going to be quite the decades of change in terms of the business use. My question is, do you have government resources to then be collaborating with DMERS to actually say, was there 4 Bowsers actually operational? Because I could imagine if Kathy had 3 of them that weren't working, she wouldn't care. And do you have ability to look into inspection records? How many times was the actual fuel tanker coming in? Was it still used as that, even though it had the land use for it? The entire cityscape has moved on since the time that it was used for that purpose. As hospitality sector, we're struggling. Like, we've had record highs in terms of weight within margins, increasing labour costs of over 30% in 5 years. We need continuity of trade, and anything that stops streetscape. There is not enough canopies happening on the proposed site. It's already a bit of a traffic hazard management when it comes to pedestrians versus cyclists versus cars. Increasing traffic with a petrol station just seems absolutely ludicrous. Just wanted to pass on those bits, and those are my thoughts. Thank you. Sorry, one last thing. I can see there was a timer left for about 50 seconds. I didn't understand how if they plan on using it for a petrol station, if you're not going to use Ango Street, how they could possibly get a tanker there. Woodville has got a narrow strip of a road. To get to Woodville Street, you'd have to go via Leake Street. To get to Leake Street, you'd have to cut out the medium street coming up from Charles Street. So that would require the council to remove that medium bump unless they're planning on somehow squeezing down the main strip of Ango Street. So that was the other consideration.
Hey, do we have any further speakers? Okay, so if we don't have any further speakers, what will happen now is that the summary of your comments will be included in the minutes of this meeting. I'll remind people that tonight is not for decision making. Tonight is for the opportunity for councillors to ask questions. I've noticed that as people have raised matters, that councillors have been madly scribbling them down, and they will be asking, I'm sure, many of those questions in addition to their own. So, and also to let you know that we'll be dealing with the items which have been specifically raised from the floor tonight are going to be the first items that we deal with. So to feel free, you don't have to stay for the whole meeting unless you really want to, of course. And so on there being no further questions, I'm going to close public question time at 6:30. Okay. Okay, so Governance Manager, can you confirm if any statements have been received?
I can confirm that statements were received from Barry and Leanna Parker of North Perth in relation to item 5.3, Megan Nearvord of North Perth in relation to item 5.2, and Nick Hidding of Subiaco, item 5.2. If any of those statements included questions, those will be answered in the briefing notes.
CEO, can you please read out any declarations of interest?
Through you, Mayor Zaman, declaration of interest was received from Councillor Wolf, an impartiality interest in relation to item 5.2, the service station DA on Angove Street. The extent of the interest is that Councillor Wolf was a former member of the Stop the Station group. The second declaration of interest from Councillor Castle, impartiality interest in relation to item 5.1, the Oxford Street proposed group dwellings. The extent of the interest is that Councillor Castle is friends with one of the landowners of this property. And there were all the declarations received, Mayor Zaman.
Do any councillors have any further interest that they wish to declare? Okay, so I'm now going to go around and see which items council members would like to specifically raise. Councillor Warner? No, in addition to the ones that have already been raised. Okay, Councillor LaFontaine, Councillor Castle, Councillor Greer.
5.1 and 6.1, please.
Okay. And 6.1. Okay, and Councillor Alexander, Councillor Wolf, Councillor Hallett.
5.4.
Okay. I'll just pull together the order. Okay, so we'll now move to item 5.2, Angove Street, North Perth, alterations and additions to service stations. Okay, Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Mayor. You have to bear with me. I've got a couple on this one. Thank you. Firstly, I think there's a really long history to this site, so I thought it might be helpful for everybody here today and listening if we could just run through a really high-level overview of recent events, including the JDAP application, the SAT appeal and the scheme amendment, just at a really high level, and how that might relate to the application we've got in front of us today. Thank you.
Through you, Ms. Amon. So there is quite a history to this property. Perhaps we'll start in maybe the most recent approval, which was in 2002. So that was an approval was granted by council at the time under the city's then town planning scheme number 1. And that was a change of use from service station to service station and vehicle, second-hand vehicle sales. So that approval effectively allowed the selling of petrol with 4 bowsers on the site, but also included some mechanical hoists within the building proper, as well as the use of 5 external parking bays for the display of those vehicles. That approval, after it was received, was enacted, and that, I guess, brings us up until the DAP application. So in 2022, in May, an application was lodged with the Development Assessment Panel for an expansion of the existing service station. The service station hadn't operated since December 2021. The application sought to clear the subject site, so 41 to 43 Angove Street, as well as the adjoining property at number 45 Angove Street, which has a dwelling on there. So sought to clear both sites and establish a new petrol station, increasing the intensity. So it had 8 bowsers instead of 4, had access points from the right-of-way as well as the existing access points from Woodville and Angove Street. That application went through a consultation period and was ultimately refused by the DAP in May 2023. As per the city's recommendation, there was a number of reasons that really related to the compatibility of the use, the impacts on the locality, particularly around traffic noise, and concerns about the public health impact from emissions, particularly on surrounding sensitive uses. Following that refusal, the applicant lodged an application of review with the State Administrative Tribunal. So since that time, that application has been with the SAT, and that still is a live application, is still an ongoing process. This application that is being considered by council was lodged in August 2023. And so that this really relates only to 41 to 43 Angove Street, so it doesn't expand into the adjoining property. And as the applicant has described, is essentially a refurbishment of the existing building. But there is perhaps some more nuance to that in considering the previous approvals.
Thank you so much. It's very helpful. The applicant submits that because there was once a petrol station at this site, that the site should be allowed to continue to operate as a petrol station. But in reading the report and sort of looking at the 2002 approval and the lack of continuous use rights demonstrated, I just wanted to be very clear and confirm the position of the report. And that's not the case, because it's not a like-for-like comparison and there have not been continuous operations or continuous use rights demonstrated.
Through you, Ms. Amon, what I should have also added on to that last question, if I might, was just about Amendment 12. So after or while the DAP application was in the assessment phase, council moved a notice of motion to seek to prohibit service stations in district centre zones like the subject site. So previously the land use classification was discretionary, so it was capable of being considered, and the amendment sought to make that a prohibited ex-use. That amendment went through consultation, was supported by council, and was ultimately approved by the minister, and that came into effect in February of this year. So that's the segue to your next question. So the city's planning scheme has, I guess, provisions in there that protect existing uses when there is a change to the scheme permissibility. In this case, we have done an assessment of the application to look at both the impacts on the existing approval from 2002, as well as against the non-conforming use provisions. I guess our comments in terms of both are it's important for council to really consider what the effect of the works on the existing approval is. So our comments on that would be the proposed application is really changing the way that the site functions and the activity that could occur on that site under the previous approval. What we mean by that is the previous approval not only allowed the selling of petrol through 4 Bowsers, but also the undertaking of motor vehicle repairs and the selling of second-hand vehicles. The works that have been proposed would remove those 2 functions from the site. And so considering the impact of all of those changes, administration isn't satisfied that this use or this application would be consistent with that previous use approval. That then takes us to the non-conforming use provisions, which call for an assessment against whether there has been a continuance of, I guess, an existing approval where there has been a scheme change. And our assessment of that has been the site was fenced off in December 2021, so there hasn't been any activity on the site in 3.5 years. While activity alone isn't the only measure of continuance, regard also needs to be given to the applicant's intention for the site. And administration's comment would be the applicant was really seeking for a larger redeveloped service station proposal initially, which was evidenced by the DAP application. This subject application was only lodged following the scheme amendment of the being gazetted to make it an next use and the refusal of the DAP application. So in effect, a bit of a bet each way.
Thank you very much. I noted in reading the report that there were a number of documents that haven't been provided by the applicant. So things like a traffic impact statement, a landscaping plan, urban design study, environmentally sustainable design assessment, and a response to the summary of submissions that was sent to the applicant. So I'm just wondering if there are any comments around that and perhaps some of the types of information or assurances that might have been sought from those documents that then haven't been provided.
Through you, Mayor Zaman, probably the first thing with application is to be very clear that it is, I guess, works related. So it's not a council, when it considers the application, needs to consider what is being sought, and that's an approval for the, I guess, the refurbishment works. The applicant in their cover letter has explained that they believe it does have existing use approval, so it's not calling for an assessment or a determination of whether the land use is acceptable. Of those supporting reports along the lines of traffic and noise are usually what would accompany a use application where it's a new use being established to demonstrate that those impacts on the surrounding area would be acceptable. The applicant, I guess, has maintained their view that they have an existing approval for the use and that they're not required to, I guess, demonstrate those impacts. In terms of the urban design study, that is outlined in our built form policy as a measure of demonstrating how facade treatments and works would be consistent with the surrounding context. Notwithstanding that one wasn't provided, we have sought advice from our design review panel chair, which is included in administration's report. And similarly with the ESD life cycle assessment, it can be tricky for those to be provided for existing buildings. So it's not common where there are works to an existing building for one to be provided. And the applicant's plans did outline ESD measures to be included, including solar panels and rainwater tanks.
Thank
Through you, Mayor Zaman, sorry if I can just add on to my colleagues' comments. So clearly from the city's perspective, it has not been demonstrated that there are existing use rights and that you cannot rely upon, I guess, the 2002 approval because the extent of the works are so different, it would function and operate differently. So for new service station of this nature, council, when you consider this development application, you need to consider it against all of the relevant deemed provisions, clause 67, all of those matters come into play. So if you have a look at the combined agenda, page 135, that's the officers at a glance assessment against all of those relevant matters, like you referred to traffic, landscaping, compatibility with setting, and we've got inline responses there as to why it has not been demonstrated by the applicant how those matters have been adequately addressed for this service station proposal.
I'll just pick up on the points around traffic, if I may. Noting those comments and noting the rationale for why a traffic impact statement hasn't been provided, I just wanted to be very clear because I know there was a lot of community concern, particularly in the JDAP application, around impact on local road networks with an estimate of an additional 600 cars per day. So I just wanted to note, although this is looking at an application for works, essentially as the report picks up on, there is no operations at the moment, and should this go through, it essentially would allow for the site to become operational. So given that we don't have an indication of, for example, the additional cars per day that would be generated as a result of that.
Through you, Mayor Simon, yes, in a nutshell, that's correct. With the previous DAP application, that was supported by a traffic impact assessment that provided, I guess, a modelling of the expected vehicle numbers based on 8 bowsers and the 24-hour operation, and that flagged issues with the capacity of Angrove Street. So I guess this, as the Executive Director had said, this hasn't gone to that degree of demonstrating how this would fit.
And the same is true then in terms of the servicing of the site by the fuel tankers. So confirming that we don't have any information around how, picking up on the comments from the public gallery tonight about how those fuel tankers might manoeuvre through the local road networks or through the site to service the site. Noting the previous application had discussion in there about requirements to widen the roads, even to allow for access. That's not something that we've got any information on for this application.
Through Mayor Simon, no.
Councillor Wolf, I might just see if any other councillors. One last question.
Thank you. I appreciate your patience with me. Thank you, everybody. My last one, I just wanted to touch on the ongoing antisocial behavioural issues at the site. So over recent months, there have been a range of issues around violence, drug use, squatting and graffiti that have caused distress to the community and drained resources of the City and WA Police. Much of that, I think, has been able to occur because of the issues around securing the site and the fencing. So I just wanted to request, please, that an amendment be prepared with an additional recommendation, if we can, seeking that the landowner takes further measures to secure the site, including secure fencing. Alternatively, if this was something that was deemed appropriate by administration, that the report could be updated perhaps to reflect that additional recommendation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I just ask, reflecting on that last point, perhaps at the council meeting itself, if we could have some further advice as to what measures have currently been undertaken in order to secure the site, and what discussions have already occurred with the landholder around trying to address the concerns around that site. Thank you. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for those questions, Councillor Wolf. You covered off some of mine. I just wanted to ask about the timeframes that we're being asked to consider, particularly the 6 months of non-conforming use. Is it correct that that starts in February 24?
Through you, Mayor Simon, the scheme is not clear when that 6 month measure is started.
Okay, so that probably leads to my next question, which is what is the relevance of the fact that the site hasn't been used since December 2021? Is that something that you've taken into account or that we should take into account?
Through you, Mayor Simon, yes, that is something that should be taken into account. So when non-conforming uses are considered, the test is really whether there has been a continuance of that use and the scheme, as an arbitrary number, pulls out 6 months through, as it's established through the tribunal and through cases related to non-conforming uses. The test of continuance is looked at based on activity that has happened on the site or hasn't happened on the site, but also what the owner's intentions for the site are, which is a little harder to, prove. But the case law talks to that there can be periods of inactivity on the site and a use can still have a non-conforming use. Administration's assessment has looked at not only the coming up to 3.5 years of inactivity on the site, but also the lodging and determining of the DAP application to go some way towards an intention of the site, but has also looked at the consistency of how the proposed works would allow the site to function with the previous approvals.
Thank you. And so would the lack of the licence for dangerous goods be a factor that you could have regard to in relation to inactivity or continuous use?
Through you, Ms. Mon, yes, that is another aspect. So the city understands that that dangerous goods licence ceased late 2021, I think. Following that, the fuel bowsers were also removed from the site. We understand that the underground fuel tanks still remain, though.
Thank you. I have a question about the clauses in relation to requests for investigation to DWER and DMIRS. What's the usual process for that to occur? Is it normally triggered by a complaint or is it on a particular schedule?
Through you, Ms. Zaman, so through both, there's two separate bits of legislation that we've referred to. One is for DWER, who administers the contaminated sites regulations, and then for DMIRS, who administer the dangerous goods safety regulations. So I guess both of those outline that there is a process where concerns can be raised, and so that's the forum that we'll be looking to use.
Okay, and just to pick up on a question from the gallery about looking at the inspection records, would I be right in assuming that that's something that DMIRS would do as part of their investigation? We wouldn't actually be involved in the investigation itself, we would just refer to them to conduct that.
Through you, Mayor Zaman, yes, so administration would be requesting for DMIRS and to DWER to investigate the current status of the site, and then to provide updates to administration on the outcome of that, so we wouldn't be directly involved with undertaking.
Thanks. Just one last question. There was also a question in the gallery around should this application be refused, and presumably the question was based on the JDAP application not proceeding. And the question was, are there any provisions to prevent an applicant making future applications? Are there measures where administration is not obliged to assess and present an application for determination by whoever has the delegation, or must every application be considered?
Through you, Ms. Mon, yes, essentially the city doesn't have an opportunity to not accept applications should they be made and they be in an acceptable form. So if this application were to be refused, another one could be lodged.
Mayor Zaman, I'll just add to that. If that next application was identical or the same application, then reasonably the applicant can expect the same outcome. So there needs to be changes, presumably to address what the issues were and the reasons for refusal of the prior application.
Are there any further questions from any councillors in relation to this item? Councillor Alexander.
Just in regard to the urban planning company that are representing QPR, on page 3 of the letter received at the City of Vincent, on the 15th of August, they claim that the land use definition still correctly applies. And also, given that the service station use is already approved, the land use itself is not required to be considered. So what's your view of that statement?
Through you, Mayor Zaman, I guess the city's view, or administration's view is contained within the report. In terms of the commentary around the land use definition, there was a different definition of a service station that applied in 2002 when the last application was approved. The definition changed under the city's current local planning scheme number 2, which came in 2018, with the main difference being the previous definition didn't allow the retail selling of other products that weren't petrol or other incidental motor vehicle related products. So you couldn't sell, drinks or food like service stations commonly do. So that would be one change to the definition. And then, as we've previously explained, looking the previous approval and the works that have been proposed, we're not satisfied that the works would be consistent with that last approval.
All right, and does that rely on continuing use?
Through you, Mayor Simon, that would form part of the assessment of whether there has been a continuance.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, we'll move on to the next item. The next item is 5.3, proposed Charles Hotel Local Development Plan. Okay, who would like to begin? Councillor Hallett.
Just a question in relation to the comment from the public gallery in relation to street access for vehicles mostly being off Charles and the impact that this could have. Would you be able to just speak to, I guess, the difference between this application versus future development applications which would have traffic modelling and things in them which would enable council to, I guess, address those issues?
Through Mayor Simon, so probably from the outset, it's important to note that the local development plan is not a development application. So the local development plan really operates to coordinate development across the site in a similar way that the built form policy currently does. There is still the need for the applicant to provide or to go through a development application process and provide the usual supporting reports, including a traffic impact assessment to demonstrate the impact at that time. In considering the LDP that has been proposed and the access that's been indicated from Eaton Street, the site has a number of access points at the moment which occur on different roads, stepping down in the hierarchy. So there is the Department of Planning has a state policy which deals with access onto regional roads like Charles Street, and that position is new developments shouldn't have any new access points onto Charles Street, and redevelopments should really be seeking to remove and rationalise existing access points with those who come from lower order roads. In the surrounding road network, both Ellesmere Street and Carrington Street are distributor roads, so their function is really to move traffic through the area. And then Eaton Street is a lower order access road, which has the primary function of providing vehicle access to properties. So I guess in that sense, access from Eaton Street is the most appropriate location. The applicants also provided, I guess, a high-level traffic impact assessment to look broadly at what vehicle numbers could be expected, and also doing an assessment of what the current capacity of the road network is. Based on existing data, the road network is effectively at about a quarter of its capacity, so that would show that additional vehicles could be accommodated within the road network without impacting on performance. but that is still something that would need to be further demonstrated through a DA process.
Thank you. And I guess, is it conceivable then that as applications then came through for the different parcels, that, maximum density around, childcare plus accommodation plus taverns, etc., that the amenity impacts of the traffic may well be a reason to decline those, and other applications would have to come forward?
Through you, Mayor Zamon, yes, I guess without speculating on a final development type, it would still be an option if the final development were not demonstrated how it could fit within that road network.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question. I suppose it's just to jog my memory, since it's a while since we've had an LDP. Could you just clarify the status of an LDP if approved by council? So my understanding that it's not binding, but I'm just interested in what weight it would carry when further development applications are lodged for the property.
Through you, Mayor Zamon, the local development plan in effect would have the same weight as the city's built form policy. So in a hierarchy of the planning framework, the city's local planning scheme is binding. As it steps down into local planning policies, and that would also include the R codes. They are more matters which are given due regard through the assessment and through clause 67 of the deemed provisions. The P provides more of a site response, a site-specific response to this particular context. So it would be up to the decision maker at that time how much weight they applied to the LDP. But ultimately, like with any other policy, it's not binding, but it's just a matter to be considered when exercising discretion.
Okay, so it's not necessarily like a pre-approval, but it would be an indication of council's comfort in the area, or council's comfort at this time in the area.
Through Mayor Simon, yeah, it would indicate a clear vision and I guess some items which would be acceptable on the site. The LDP itself really relates to 4 key points about building height, about setbacks, landscaping and vehicle access. So that is just one component of the planning framework. Under the R codes, there's a whole suite of other matters that would need to be considered about the appearance of the building, the amenity of the building. So yeah, it would just form one aspect of that consideration.
Okay, which leads to my last question, which is just to clarify that the illustrations that are contained in the papers are just that. They're just examples of what might be possible under the LDP and would not to have any real regard to whether those look approvable, look acceptable. They're just an example.
Through Mayor Zamon, yeah, it's just an illustrative indication of what could occur, but what council is approving is the actual LDP and the building envelopes that are in attachment 2.
Councillor LaFontaine.
Thank you, Mayor Zamon. The report mentioned an estimated 157 vehicle trips at peak PM time for Eaton Street South. I'm just wondering, do we have current information on the current peak PM vehicle trips on Eaton Street South, as well as the current percentage of heavy vehicles that use the street?
Through Mayor Zamon, the city's traffic count data didn't go into the peak hour numbers. I would need to check about the heavy vehicle.
Thank you. And reading the summary of submissions in the appendix, I was wondering if a breakdown of the individual submission could be provided to council.
Through you, Mayor Zaman, would it be possible to clarify what we mean by a breakdown of the individual submissions?
In the appendix, there was a table that had a summary of submissions as a title. For me, it's difficult to identify if a comment has been made by one resident or if it's been made multiple times by many. So in order to get a snapshot of what's been expressed by community consultation, I was wondering if just the raw data could be provided to council.
Through you, Mayor Zaman, we can have a look at how we can present that through the briefing notes.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions from any councillors? Councillor Alexander.
Perhaps you could indulge me, because I've had a number of calls from ratepayers in this area, and their main concern is the impact on their residences, which, you know, they had quiet enjoyment for. Some have been living in there for 40 odd years, etc. And on page 25 of the council's report, I'm presuming where it says the road, Ellesmere Road, capacity 6,000 vehicles, that's a capacity in 7 days, is it?
Through you, Mayor Zaman, so 6,000 vehicles for Ellesmere Street would be per day, is what that road could take.
Yes, but what do you suggest? I mean, 6,000 vehicles in 1 day. And when you're like people from, I think it's Selden Street, which is a small street which contacts onto Ellesmere Street, and can be used as a bit of a rat run. Are we? And it talks about a future DA in the in page 26 is going to consider the effect on the roads. So at what stage do we say that's too many vehicles on a small road in a residential area, which, you know, people have, you know, bought 30 and 40 years ago, which adjoins a small park? I mean, these people are not concerned about, you know, 8 stories and that on Charles Street and those sorts of things. That makes good sense. But they are concerned about the volumes of traffic. And it appears here that we don't actually know what the volumes of traffic are likely to be, but they certainly seem to be excessive. Like, there are some problems now in that area. So in any future DA, I just request that really has to be taken into account, so councillors have an understanding of what the likely increase in traffic is. So is there any commentary on that you have?
Through you, Mayor Zaman, so the table that is on page 25 of the report really breaks down what the current capacity of Ellesmere Street is under the city's accessible city strategy, which is 6,000 vehicles per day, and then the current volume based on the 2023 data, which was 1,457 vehicles per day. So round about currently a quarter of the capacity. The applicants provided a traffic report to support the LDP and to demonstrate, I guess, at a high level what the impact of additional traffic would be. And based on the current relatively low capacity of Ellesmere Street, administration is comfortable that there would be capacity to accommodate an increase in vehicles without impacting on the functionality of the road. That doesn't remove the obligation of the applicant when we get to a future DA to provide a more detailed traffic assessment, and that would need to consider the exact number of dwellings that are proposed and the exact land use mix and floor area and expected number of customers for non-residential tenancies that would ultimately be used to inform a traffic assessment and the expected impacts. So it would still be something that needs to be assessed through the future DAs. And as we mentioned earlier, if those applications couldn't demonstrate that the additional traffic could fit within the existing road network without having an undue impact, it could potentially be refused on that basis.
Okay, I'd be interested in what those loads are, because I mean, 6,000 vehicles a day on any road is almost insane. And the current one in Ellesmere Street, for example, of 1,457 vehicles, is 24% of the 6,000. So that might be reasonable. So I would be interested in seeing an estimation of what it's likely to be and what is acceptable. Do you have a view of what is acceptable? Is there an acceptable when a small street goes from, probably 300 or 400 a day if you're lucky, to potentially 6,000?
Through you, Mayor Simon, it would be hard to speculate without that detailed traffic assessment in front of us to support DA. But I guess as a quantifiable measure, any increase that is still within that overall capacity of the road, which is 6,000 vehicles a day, would be acceptable under the WAPC's traffic impact assessment guidelines.
Well, I think that'd be ridiculous to go to 6,000 for a small street, but I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Are there any other questions from any other councillors pertaining to this item? Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next item. So the next item is 5.6, new lease to Kids Galore, 15 Haynes Street, North Perth. Are there any questions from any councillors? Councillor Warner.
Thank you. I'm just curious as what's happening with 6 London Street. Obviously, Western Power has held things up. Construction is a slow train, but it still possesses a sign advertising the space for sale. So I was just wondering what the intention is behind that.
Through Mayor Zaman. Look, there's challenges with developing that site. Our understanding is that the proponent is not seeking to sell off the entirety of the site, but that's something that we can clarify with the applicant. We have the applicant raising their hand, and we can confirm maybe separately through the briefing notes. Otherwise, some comments. Governance Manager.
Governance Manager, do you have any comments for the meeting?
Through the chair, I don't have any comments on that, but I'll reach out to the landowner tomorrow and get some feedback.
Are there any further questions from any councillors in relation to this item? Okay,
Yes,
I'm going to. Sorry. Sorry.
Can I ask a question,
Councillor Greer. Yes.
Thank you. So the recommendation is for the fixed increase of 5% annually on the 1st of July each year. Can administration just explain how we came to the number of 5%, and was a higher number or a staged increase in future years considered?
Through the chair, we had a look at where CPI is currently falling in the current increase clause within the contract, and considered that 5% best reflected where current CPI was at, and reflected a sensible increase amount to be applied.
And is there just a reason that why we keep it the same for the several years rather than a staged over time in case CPI goes up?
Through the chair, 5% reflected the best case scenario. Typically in our leases we would have in line with CPI, but often CPI is much less than 5%, and that's resulted in us getting much lower increases than we would otherwise achieve. So 5% represented a good stable increase over the period.
Thank you. That's all the questions from me.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, so we'll move on to the next item. The next item is annual review, accessible city strategy, thriving places strategy and arts plan. Okay, so are there any questions? Councillor Howlett.
Thank you. Just one in relation to the accessible city strategy update. There's a number of items that have not been started, not because of, I guess, original timetable, but because of resourcing limitations. In particular, 1.2.1, which was about the paths and pedestrian kind of mapping, etc. Can I just find out more about what the budget need is there? That's the 250,000 per year. Is that something we can revisit in the mid-year budget review? Because it seems like as one of the first kind of items, it kind of underpins a lot of the other actions as well. Briefing notes is fine.
I will need to take that on notice and put something in the briefing note, not across that particular action.
Okay, so we'll have that in the notes. Councillor Hallett, do you have any further questions? Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, I'm going to move on. So the next item is 6.1, Local Emergency Management Plan. Oh, sorry, what's that? Oh, beg your pardon. I missed it. Sorry, number 4, Oxford Street, Leederville, proposed group dwellings. Okay, are there any questions pertaining to this item? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Mayor Zaman. My question is about the ficus tree. So in the advice notes, point 16, we've got the applicant is advised to liaise with the City's Parks team regarding the ficus tree trimming and pruning. Is advice the strongest possible option available, or is there any conditions on the skill set of the person who can undertake that pruning and trimming, or is it just a commitment that they could seek advice if they'd like?
Through you, Mayor Zaman, yes, that is the, I guess, most stringent tool we can place for the ficus tree pruning. Essentially, we have consulted with our design review panel members who specialise in arboriculture on the pruning of the tree, as well as our parks department and the applicant, to ensure that appropriate pruning can occur to still facilitate the development and retain the tree. Because the tree is located on a separate private lot that is not on our trees of significant register, we can't actually require any specifics in terms of the pruning. However, we're confident that due to the location of the tree and where the branches are, that our parks team have the specialty to provide that advice to get the pruning correct.
Thanks, that was my only question.
Okay, so now we move to 6.1, Local Emergency Management Plan update. So, does anyone have any questions pertaining to this item?
Yes, please.
Yes, Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Mayor Zaman. This one's probably seeking some more information for the briefing notes. The document refers a few times to the DC Local Emergency Relief and Support Plan for the Perth and Fremantle region. So I was wondering if we could get a copy of that or a link to it in the briefing notes. I'm particularly curious for the list of the centres that have been classified as suitable evacuation centres, and if we consider that list to be physically accessible to disabled people, and if we've got any detailed information. There's a list at 8.5.1 about the information evacuation plans for the identified special needs groups. And again, that links back to, goes to Appendix 2, and then Appendix 2 links us to Appendix 9 of that other document. So I was just hoping we could get a copy of it, please.
Yes, through the chair, we can provide that in the briefing notes.
Thank you very much.
We had a mystery voice through the system. So where is it? Oh, sorry. So is it Director?
Thank you. That was Chris Dixon, our coordinator in Ranger Services Online.
Hi,
just
Chris.
a note that in respect to City of Vincent, our evac centres that we've identified are the Loftus Community Centre, which is accessible, Mount Hawthorn Town Hall, North Perth Town Hall, Royal Park Hall, and we've also done a bit of an audit with Department of Communities, so we should be able to, with that document, provide a little bit more information around accessibility needs. But those particular centres, we're conscious of making sure those centres are accessible regardless.
Excellent, thank you.
Excellent. Are there any further questions pertaining to this item? Okay, so I didn't have any other items down that people had indicated they wanted to ask questions about, and there are no confidential items to discuss. So I'd like to thank the public and the live stream viewers for attending and close the meeting at 7:19. You can turn the live stream off.